I guess I'm supposed to use it. You know, when I go to some churches, you know, in the United States. I love to go to Pentecostal churches. And one of the reasons I like to is their sound systems. You go into a church, it has 100 seats, there's 50 people, and they have a 5,000-watt amplifier, you know. Speakers build up on both walls. The shingles come off the building when they sing, but you know, it's funny how we are with sound systems just in general sometimes. You wonder how Christ did it, don't you? You know, how Paul did it. You know, get up there and if 5,000 people at a time, Paul had win them to Christ. He didn't have an amplifier, no microphone, you know, no nothing. Well, I want to start off by prefacing the fact that I am not about to deliver the message that I am going to deliver tomorrow night. Tomorrow night's message is going to be extremely evangelistic in nature, and I do urge you to get your friends and to bring them out there tomorrow night. By the way, I'm going to say something about that message. The message that I have tomorrow night is my official testimony message. And I'll be delivering that message tomorrow night and Sunday morning. I say official message. I used to give a very heartfelt testimony that dealt with my personal experience with Jesus Christ, but nobody wanted to hear that. And I would give that message, and then I'd go out to the church foyer, and I'd be surrounded by people who would ask me questions. And the questions would be, did your mother really attempt to defect to the Soviet Union? And did she do this? And did she really run the Fair Play for Cuba Committee? And is she really the manager of the Communist Party bookstore? And I mean, this would go on and on. I'd be in the foyer of the church for hours, you know. So finally I said, this has got to end. I've got to figure out a way just to stop this so I can get out of here and eat lunch. And so what I began to do is I took these 3x5 cards, or actually they were 4x6 cards, and I would get back to my motel room and I would write down the answers to these questions. You see, I just write down the questions. And I did this for a couple weeks, and then I sat and I started to answer the questions on these cards. And after a couple of weeks of collecting them, then I put them all in chronological order. And I got up one morning at some church somewhere, I think it was out in West Texas somewhere, and I just literally read all the answers off of these cards in chronological order. Got out to the foyer, everybody just walked right by me. And it was just amazing. I had found what everybody wanted to hear. Now, the problem with this is that the message, instead of it being a heartfelt testimony message, it had become a very hardcore political message. That was what the Christian people, particularly in the United States, wanted to hear about. It gave all the details of the removal of prayer from the public schools and my mother's activities and this and that and the other thing. But the message winds up with about the last 2 or 3 minutes of it being about me accepting Christ as Lord and Savior. And it leaves out all the very personal reasons that people become atheists or why they get involved in some of the things they do, which is basically sin. You know, just sin. Now, I go to the atheist conventions in the United States, and we buy a full-page ad in the newspaper. In fact, I think there are some copies of it over there, aren't there, Fred, of the full-page ad in the newspaper that we do. And it says, Dear Atheist, or it says and it's addressed to my mother and all atheists, and it explains, you know, it tells them how Jesus loves them, and then we go out and we have these witnessing teams in front of the conventions, and I'll stand out there in the street as the atheists come and go, and we're passing out the literature to them. People will come up to debate different things, you know, and there will always be some woman that will come up and she'll start pointing her finger at me and telling me why there is no God, and I can look in her eyes and tell that she's had 6 abortions, and that's why she's there, you know. And I can just tell. So finally, as soon as she stops long enough for me to get a word, and I'll just hit it right on the head. And I'll say, it doesn't matter how many abortions you've had, Jesus will forgive you. And she'll just stare at me, Now, how did he know that? That's what's going on. Jesus can actually let you know if you just... Most people who claim not to believe in God, most people, not most people, all people, who say that they don't believe in God, they have either done something, are doing something, or plan to do something that is contrary to the law of God. It's that simple. And they want to hold on to that, and they can't hold on to it if they're going to be Christians. They can't. They'd have to let go of it. If they're really going to commit their lives to Christ. So in dealing with those folks, I can almost instantly tell what the problem was. Well, this goes back to my mother, and which all got left out of my testimony message, my official testimony message. And it's a shame because my message, in a way, perpetuates the myth that people have about my mother. Everybody sees my mother as this super intelligent woman who has philosophized and come to the conclusion that there is no God, that she's made an intellectual, brilliant woman who's made an intellectual decision that there is no God. And that she is just like the rest of us, just like you and you and you, sitting at the table here and eating the dinner, just a wonderful person who has made this intellectual decision that there is no God. Now, this is also fostered by the fact that most atheists will tell you that they have made intellectual decisions that there's no God. Just ask any atheist you ever talked to, right, Fred? So I read the entire Bible when I was 6 years old, and I made an intellectual decision that there was no God. All of them, they don't do the same thing, My mother claims to have read the Bible from cover to cover when she was 7 years old and made an intellectual decision. There's no God. She actually claims this. Now, this is a lie, by the way. And all of this intellectual stuff, most true intellectuals are not atheists. Now, a lot of them are theists. A lot of them have a confused idea of what God is. But I've never run into any true intellectual, real true intellectual that was an atheist. And you can name who you want. Alexander Graham Bell, Albert Einstein, von Buren. Any one of the great scientists or intellectuals, none of them ever came out and said, I'm an atheist. Now, some of them might have been a little bit agnostic and said, well, there may be something out there, but I don't know what it is. I can't find it in my microscope. But you never get any of them that are... Who are the atheists? Atheists are people that claim to be intellectuals who aren't. Most of them are high school dropouts. My mother puts out this literature, and it's interesting. It basically says, if you believe what I believe, then you are superior to other people. You have evolved further. You are further along in the evolutionary process and more intellectual and superior to anybody that believes in a God. And so, I need to sign up for this, then I'm superior to everybody. You see, the same message that the communists taught, the same message that the Nazis taught, the same message that every far-out fringe group teaches. And that is, you believe what I believe, you're more intelligent than other people, you're superior to other people, you're further advanced than other people. And then they go around, they parade up and down the streets, and they tell you, ask any communist, they'll tell you they're all wonderfully educated people. We made an intellectual decision for communism. Let me tell you where most communists are recruited into the Communist Party. They're recruited out of the unemployment lines, not at universities, out of the unemployment lines. They're recruited out of the welfare lines, not out of universities, out of the welfare lines. They are people who cannot take care of themselves in a free society and need a society that will take care of them. They need a government that will tell them where to go, what to do, what kind of job to have, what kind of education to have, and to feed them and to bury them, because they can't take care of themselves. And so those are the type of people who are recruited into communism. Those are the same type of people that are recruited into Nazism, the same kind of people that are recruited into the atheist movement. Generally speaking, individuals who can't take care of themselves and who blame others for the condition that they find themselves in. Now, that was my mother. God bless her. You know, this poor woman was a model of Karl Marx. You know, every one of Marx's children killed themselves. Karl Marx's children, all of Karl Marx's children committed suicide. Karl Marx was a horrible alcoholic that we know of. He was also probably a cocaine addict. Now that we can't prove, but he was a horrible alcoholic. He was never able to hold down a job in his life, and he devised a system of economics for people that principally benefited people who wouldn't work for themselves, that would be taken care of by others because he needed that kind of system to exist to take care of himself. Well, that was my mother. Exactly the same type of situation. Absolutely couldn't take care of herself. I can't blame her. She came out of a horribly dysfunctional family. I mean, many generations of horrible dysfunctionality. She had grandparents that worshipped Satan. She had a father who ran an alcohol roadhouse that sold alcohol during Prohibition, and Lord knows what else he sold at that roadhouse. He had a mother that read tarot cards and that used to take people's hair of her enemies and burn it and send demons out to get them. She had an uncle that was a union enforcer who used to go around and beat up the wives of managers in order to get the union's point across to them. She had another uncle who had a bleeding statue of Jesus Christ, and who was a phony faith healer, and who would get his victims in there and then pump this little thing, and the statue would bleed at the appropriate time, and while he prayed over them and bilked them out of their money. And then her parents sent her to church. Can you imagine how confused this poor girl was? I mean, they sent all these things going on inside of this home, and they sent her to church. What she did is she completely confused what was going on inside of the church with what was going in and around in her home. And she started to confuse spiritualism with knowing the Spirit of God. She started to confuse spiritualistic type rituals with church doctrine. And by the time she was in her mid-teens, late teens, she was already in sexual troubles. And then she started to build a fantasy life of what her home was, which it wasn't. She turned her father into a great businessman. She turned a black family that helped out hers whenever they were broke occasionally into being their chauffeur and butler and maid. She turned a miserable teenage life into a fancy life in a 3-story white home with Cadillacs all over the place that didn't exist. And she carried this fantasy with her to World War II when she joined the WACs. Already married to a Jewish man, and she went to involved in World War II, more fantasies. She came back in her writings. She claims to have been on Eisenhower's personal staff. Well, when I wrote my book, we did some extensive research on it and went over the name of every single person that was on Eisenhower's staff. She just wasn't there. And she became involved with my father, who was married. And as a result of that, I was born. She came back to the United States after World War II, and she could not cope with the fact that my father wouldn't divorce his wife and marry her. She blamed religion, the fact that he was a Catholic, blamed the church, and that blame, external blame, blaming everybody, blaming everything, for everything that even today, it is the President of the United States is personally doing this to me. Look at what these people are doing to me. Look at what these people are doing to me, doing to me. No internal responsibility to anything that she has ever done, anything, anywhere. Well, my mother came back in this hatred, this horrible hatred for the church, and for my father, because he was in the Catholic Church. And this, there was all this internal conflict in this home. My mother had alcohol problems, but they were periodic. So, she would occasionally... I'll never forget, first girlfriend I ever had was, of all things, little Chinese girl. She was 16 years old. We were 16 years old. And I think I went out on one date with her. Well, my mother went up. This girl's father owned a Chinese restaurant. So she went up there one night with one of her boyfriends, got drunk, and threw up over every table in the place. I mean, this is the kind of situation. I'm growing up in this, I've got constant argument, constant fighting going on inside of this home. My mother couldn't hold down a job, so we had to live with her parents. And then she got pregnant again by another married man. And the vicious arguments that went on in our home because my grandfather didn't want this drunk in his house. And there were dishes bouncing off the wall. Knives would be pulled. My mother would go after people with knives and slice them up. She cut me, cut her father, cut her brother. She hated her father so much because he would not accept her sexual conduct that when I was about 14 years old, for months and months and months and months, she beat on me, trying to convince me to murder that man, until finally I said, why don't you just murder him yourself? Why do I have to do it for you? Why can't you kill him? If you really want him dead, why can't you kill him? Why do I have to do this for you? But that was the whole story of her life, This imaginary fantasy life where she controlled things and did things, but never actually did things for herself. Everybody had to do the things for her. Her defection to the Soviet Union, was it really out of communism? I seriously doubt it. It was out of embarrassment. She didn't want to show up to the school where my brother was going to go on his 6th birthday with a birth certificate that showed him as being illegitimate. And so she decided to take the entire family and move them to Russia, minus those birth certificates. And all her association with communism was only to have somebody be able to take care of her. In an atheistic, communistic society, it wasn't wrong to have illegitimate children. It wasn't wrong to lose your job every 3 months. It wasn't wrong to have people carry you home when you were dead drunk. You see, none of those things weren't a problem in that type of a society, because in a godless, atheistic, a communistic society, there was no real right or wrong in all those moral venues. They just did not exist, and things were okay. They didn't even want her. I mean, they looked at this woman's record of one job after the other. I mean, she was an aerospace engineer, a social worker, a nurse, a librarian, a bookkeeper in a tire plant. I mean, this woman had not done one thing for more than 3 months in her life, except finally when she went to work for the government and they kept her for 2 years. Does that tell you something? This was my life. This was my life. I grew up in the basement of our home, hiding. I was convinced for many years, and this before I even thought that there was a God. I was convinced that there had been a mistake at the hospital. And that somewhere there was some monster tormenting a perfectly normal family. and that he had been switched with me at birth. And I had this fantasy for years as I would listen to all this noise and violence going on inside of this home. Not to mention the sheriff. I don't know who picks things up when you don't pay them for them here, but in the States, the sheriff shows up to pick up this stuff with a warrant, because my mother would get a good job, get stuff on credit, get fired. Sheriff would come and get it. She'd go out, get a good job, buy stuff on credit, get fired, the sheriff would come and pick it up. I mean, this was a normal, everyday occurrence at my home. I mean, is there any wonder that this woman didn't move toward the left? You know, where nobody's going to come pick up your stuff. It's okay if you don't pay for it. That's one of the things that was wrong in Russia, you know. You didn't have to really pay for anything. Everything was subsidized, and as a result, there was not enough of anything, and there were shortages of everything. Everything has to be rationed. It's just a matter of how you do it. In the West, we do it with money. There, they did it with coupons. So in any event, I was raised in this type of absolute insanity. And it was under that basis that my mother took the prayers out of the public schools. And it was more the hatred for having to grow up in a nation, or not grow up, but for have her children go to school in a nation where they were being taught moral values, where they were being taught the difference between right and wrong, where they were being taught about the gospel, where they were being taught about the free enterprise system. She couldn't stand it when they refused to take her in Russia, and as a result of that, the lawsuit was filed, prayer was taken out of the schools, and now the schools in the United States are every bit as bad as they were in Russia at the worst point. See, we cannot even teach in the schools now to have a monogamous relationship, because that's a violation of separation of church and state. Well, you don't have to mention God. You see, monogamy is a Judeo-Christian principle, so you can't teach it. That's a violation of separation of church and state. You can't teach that homosexuality is wrong, because that's a Judeo-Christian principle, so you can't teach that. In fact, you can't teach that anything's wrong. You can't teach that theft is wrong. You can't teach that murder's wrong. You can't teach that using drugs is wrong. The only thing that you can teach the kids is that they should use condoms. I mean, that's about the only moral value that you're allowed to teach. But you're not even allowed to tell them that they don't work. That's the sad part. Anyway, I came out of that type of environment, so I just followed right along with it most of my life. When I was 16 years old, my mother bought me a case of beer for my birthday, so I drank it. You know, that night. This is the way I was raised. And I remember getting out of that home, the thing that I was most thankful for when I was 18 years old is that I could drink myself into oblivion and forget that I had ever been a part of that. You know? And I spent the next, I don't know, 15 years of my life going from one woman to the other and drinking. You know, why would I want to stay with one woman that only remind me of my mother eventually anyway? You know, I had absolutely no respect whatsoever for anyone that was female, because all they did was reminded me that my mother was female. I'd have to look for my scars, you know, of all the violence, physical violence that I had gone through when I was a child. Now, keep in mind that everybody in this room walked in here thinking that Madeline Murray O'Hare was a great intellectual who had made some kind of an intellectual decision or philosophical decision somewhere along the way to be an atheist. And in fact, the most people in this room, if not all of you, thought that that's what all atheists were about. It is just like thinking that the communists were just like we were, except they had a different philosophical position. Yeah, they had a different philosophical position. They murdered 40 million of their own citizens over a period of 70 years because those people disagreed with them. That's quite a different philosophical position, isn't it? You know, over there, if you didn't like your political opponent, you didn't write a stiff letter to the Times. You murdered them. I mean, this is just the way it was done. That's communism. People are nothing more than animals. That's what it's about. You got an animal bothering you, you kill it. I mean, this is the way it is. It's just like rodents. It's like, kangaroos out in your backyard eating the wrong plants. Kill the thing. Get rid of it. Exterminate it. It's a pest. Well, that's that philosophy. People don't understand. Czechoslovakia was a free country briefly after World War II. Briefly. They actually had an election. And the communists said, as soon as we're elected and our party comes in, we're going to outlaw all the other political parties and we're going to put you in jail. And the opposition leader said, oh, isn't that funny? This is a democracy. You won't do that. They did. It's the only place that ever voted in communism. That was the last free election they ever had. That was the end of it. Well, I grew up in that. I went out into the world. I drank myself into oblivion for the next perhaps 10 or 12 years. I did fantastically in business somehow along that. It'll please you to know that I was a load and balance officer for Qantas Airlines while I was drinking a fifth of scotch a day, and that every Qantas jet that took off from Honolulu was personally balanced by me. The cargo loading plan was set by me. The fueling was set by me. And the tail trim settings that were given to the captain were calculated by me, normally when I was dead drunk. Along with all the BOAC, at the time it was called BOAC, British Aircraft, I also did the VC-10s that operated out of there as well. To give you an idea. It's a very critical job, by the way. You have 3 feet on the bottom of an airplane on which to balance it on the fulcrum point. And if you miss that fulcrum point, one of 2 things either happens. If you miss the fulcrum point and you have it too far back, the nose wheel never gets off the ground. If you have it too far forward, the nose wheel never gets off the ground. If you have it too far back, the tail hits the ground when it takes off and the airplane breaks in half. So that's every jet, by the way, that you get on. Every single one of them. That'll keep you up in case you have to fly in the next few weeks, won't it? Won't forget that for a while, I'll bet. But something happened to me along the way. And that is, although my mother, as destructive as that lifestyle was, could never to this day at age 70 give it up. Could never give it up. She just couldn't. The poor gal just is a glutton for punishment. She's 70 years old, weighs 300 pounds. And still today, whenever she can actually get the liquor in her, she'll drink it. But I couldn't stand that. I couldn't stand that lifestyle because I had managed to stay around other human beings for a while where my mother couldn't, where she'd push people out every 3 months or 6 months or go from job to job. I had become successful in those jobs. And I saw how other people lived, and I could see that it was different than the way that I was living and the way that I was raised, and that there was something strange about what I was doing. And I didn't like the fact, the first time that I got fired because I showed up drunk or didn't show up at all, it really hurt me. And it hurt me financially. And I didn't like having pleasant things taken away from me. Those were important to me the way they weren't important to my mother. And finally, and I say this, some people say, and I know you hear it, if you ever know an alcoholic that has stopped drinking, they will say to you that they're a grateful alcoholic. And people say, how could this person possibly be grateful? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because if they're in Alcoholics Anonymous or another 12-step program, they probably have achieved a spiritual life that most Christians will never achieve. Will never achieve. But beside that, I'm a grateful alcoholic because of the fact that alcohol managed to bring me to my knees so that I could discover God. Without that, I might have gone through my whole life never having that relationship. without ever having a relationship with God, of having a loving God that I could turn to. But some people, and it's incredible, I see them that are forced down into the dirt and still won't look anywhere else for anything. But fortunately I did, and I developed, over a period of time, I developed a relationship with God as I got the alcohol out of my system that eventually led to a relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, everybody came in here waiting to hear this Damascus Road experience from me. In fact, I and Brother Bob were talking about this earlier. Now, there are two key differences. I also have people that say, oh, we can hardly wait for your mother to have that Damascus Road experience. Now, there's some problems with this. First of all, Saul, was a godly man. At the time he was persecuting the church, he was a godly man. He followed the law. He believed in God. He was not a drunkard. He was not an adulterer. He was not a fornicator. He was not any type of a sinner at all. He was persecuting the church because he was told to persecuting the church. He was a follower of the law, and he was following the instructions of the rabbis. And he was probably picked by the Lord, picked out because of his godliness. Now, people forget that, and they apply the experience that Saul had to every drunken sot, every adulterer, every murderer, and why do Christians compare Saul to these people? He was a godly man. And if he wouldn't have been godly, I seriously doubt that he would have been taken. Not only that, but when he had the experience that he had on the Damascus Road, he did not start to preach the next day. He didn't. Yet the Christian community expects every single individual who is a celebrity in the world today, who accepts Christ and jumps on the other side of the fence, to immediately pick up their Bible, parade around the country, and preach. And I could stand here and name to you a dozen singers, rock stars, and actors who have accepted Christ and who the church has grabbed, marched around the country to put on display as their trophies, took from and took from and took from and took from, and never fed back. Until today, those people are in the same place they were when the church found them. B.J. Thomas, wonderful singer. He lives in Dallas, not far from me. He's drunk today. You know, he doesn't believe he's a born-again Christian anymore. Church grabbed him. He's a famous singer. Let's parade him around, have him sing Christian songs. Show one of wonderful Christ. Show the miracle of God in his life to everybody. But whatever we do, don't feed him. Don't teach him. Don't take care of him. Use them, drain him, fast while there's still something in there, and then toss them to one side. And this is the way we treat celebrities, over and over and over again. And then when that celebrity embarrasses us, we're just absolutely aghast that he would do something like that to us, the church. You know? Well, we do it to ourselves when we do that to people. I had it done to me. Well, I wrote a letter of apology to the Baltimore newspapers and said, I'm sorry I got involved in this, and boy, I'll tell you what, I had 500 invitations to churches to come and talk about my mother, boom, like that. I didn't have any invitations to Sunday school. I didn't have anybody that said, come on, brother, let us take you under your wing. Let us put you in your church and teach you about Jesus and get you a firm footing in the... No, I didn't have any of that. But I had plenty of invitations to go preach. I was in the pulpit preaching at Pentecostal churches before I knew what Pentecostal meant. Somebody got up and spoke in tongues, and I said, gee whiz, is that person okay? I didn't know. I'm serious. But I was being prayed to preach in that church. I was a well-known evangelist, see. Knew nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. because the church wanted to be able to have that trophy, to parade around. I am amazed that I made it through there. I am amazed that I actually got into a Bible study. I am amazed that I defied the church and that I'm still a sober Christian today, because I had to defy the church in order to make it this far. Because if it was for the church, up to the church, I would have already been used up and discarded. It's just that simple. So much for the Road on Damascus experience. I will guarantee you that they are rare, and that any time that somebody is advertised as having a road to the Damascus experience, it is probably a lie, and that they have probably gone through the same gut-wrenching experiences to find God that I have, and that they have probably been dragged through the mud just like I have, and that experience has probably just as been hard-earned as the experience that I had, and that when nobody is going to get up and say Jesus came down and sat down next to them and said, I want you. And if they do say that Jesus Christ talked personally to them and audibly, then I think you should probably check their medication anyway, because this is not the way it generally happens. And if you think about it, it's not the way it happened in your life. So don't look for somebody who it has. We all have wonderful experiences that we can explain, wonderful salvation experiences that we can explain. But most of them are not Paul and Saul on the road to Damascus. Now, I was asked to talk about the Soviet Union. And I will say this, I became involved there about 5 years ago simply because I wanted to see the place that I almost was raised in. My mother almost defected there. And I got over there 5 years ago, and I think you went before that, didn't you, Fred? 85. And the first thing that I got off the airplane and that I discovered was that the Soviet Union was a third world nation, in absolutely horrible physical condition, economic condition. The weeds were growing everywhere up on the monuments. The roads were in horrible condition. The traffic lights didn't work. The officers from the Air Force and the Army and the Navy would come up to you and try to sell you their belt buckles and their insignia in order to get money, in order to pay to be able to buy their families food. Does this sound like a superpower to you? If you've never been there, the average Australian lives a life like royalty compared to the average Russian. The average Russian lives in my living room of my home in Dallas. I don't have a gigantic home. My living room in Dallas, or I guess, what do you call living rooms here? You do call them or lounge rooms, is larger than the average apartment in Moscow. The average apartment in Moscow is about 400 square feet. How many meters is that? That's, 10 square meters? Is that about right? 10 or 12 square meters. I don't know if you do it in feet or meters here. Which do you do it in? Meters? Both? Well, it'd be about a 400 square foot, about a 12 square meter apartment. I don't even think it's that much. I think it's 4 by 4, be 4 square meter apartment. Yeah, something like that. And most of them have to share bathroom facilities. If they have a restroom in the apartment, they're lucky. The average one is 3 rooms. The construction is absolutely horrible. The floors lean in one direction or the other. A washing machine is an unheard of luxury. My manager that runs my operation in Moscow has a washing machine, and she had to keep it a secret because of the number of people that would come and want her help in washing their clothing, so they didn't have to do it by hand. And Moscow all these beautiful freeways and tollways that you have here, and the interstate highway system that we have in America. Most Americans had the mindset that that's the way Russia was. They just had a different philosophical point of view. Does this sound familiar? Remember I'm talking about my mother? The tremendous misconceptions that people have about other people and the reason they do things and in other nations. My mother's, Russia's, the place that my mother wanted to live, that she thought was such a utopia, was an absolute trash bin. I mean, you wouldn't sentence people. You wouldn't send convicts to live in this place. It was so bad. You had the ring road around Moscow was a 2-lane highway with stoplights. And people see that on a map, they figure it's like the ring roads that we have around our major cities in Dallas with big interchanges and 6- and 8-lane highways. It's a 2-lane highway that had stoplights on it. And the stoplights didn't work. And all this huge military machine that they had, none of that stuff worked either. You saw how it worked, well their weapons worked in Iraq. That's how well they worked. They couldn't hit anything. It was just absolutely horrifying. And we stood in fear of these people for the last 30 years after World War II. And the truth of the matter is, it was a big paper tiger. All they really had was a 4 million man land army, which is fearsome. But I think most of their stuff didn't work either. And it was the way their society was organized. And I got there and I felt so sorry for those people when I saw how they actually lived. And the central planning. Isn't central planning grand? I know you have political parties here that believe in central planning. Let me tell you how wonderful central planning works. See, they didn't have individual apartment buildings and homes and hospitals and hotels, didn't even have heating in the building. What they did is they figured it would be much more efficient to have huge boilers somewhere in the city. So Moscow is broken down into 7 regions that have these gigantic boilers. And they pump hot water into the regions. And there's not a boiler in a single building. Not a heater in a single building. Not a hot water heater in a single building. It all comes from some centralized location. And you know what happens when one of those boilers break down? 1/7 of the city goes without heat. Hospitals go completely cold. No backups in the hospitals. Apartment buildings all completely cold. Sometimes the boilers break down and sections of the city go for weeks or even months without hot water. Central planning. The marvels of central planning, of having one person somewhere take care of everybody instead of people having the responsibility to keep the hot water in their own home. But see, we can't trust you to fix your own hot water heater, can we? We have to provide the hot water for you because you don't have enough brains to supply your own hot water heater. You don't have enough brains to keep it fixed and to keep hot water in your own home. Big Daddy has to take care of that somewhere for you and to make sure that it's pumped into your home. Except who makes sure that Big Daddy is able to take care of that hot water heater? Who manages to do that? It just didn't work. It just didn't work. It's called a command economy, and it just doesn't work. And a command economy is when somebody sits up there and says, okay, this is how we'll make it work. This is how we're going to make everybody have everything. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Never will work. No matter what size of society, it won't work. In any event, I went over there and I got involved because I felt so sorry for those people. And one of the things that I began to do is to print Bibles in the Communist Party press over there. This is while the Communist Party was still in charge. It was very simple. I walked into a Communist Party plant and I said, I'd like to get some printing done. And I said, I'm willing to pay for it in hard currency. And they looked at each other and they said, in hard currency? I said, yes, I'll pay for it in hard currency. They said, well, what do you want printed? And I said, Bibles. And they looked at each other and they said, you're going to pay us in hard currency. I said, yes, hard currency. They said, "You mean U.S. dollars?" I said, "Yes, U.S. dollars." They said, "How many Bibles do you want?" I'm serious. That was the Communist Party press. And when other organizations were buying the Bibles for $2 a piece in the United States and spending another $1 to ship them, I was printing them in the Soviet Union for 25 cents a piece. Or what's going on now. They were willing to violate their very basic principles that they said they believed in order to get hard currency so that they'd be able to buy parts for their printing presses and to be able to function in some way over there. The hotels are a joke. What they call a 5-star hotel in Russia, I don't know what you'd call it over here. In the United States, we have Motel 6. You know, that's a place that you basically get a television set that doesn't work and a bed that's a little bit bowed. Well, that's what they consider a 5-star hotel over there. When I opened a tour company in Russia, we had to go on a bribery system. You know, we go in there and we bribe the chef. We order the meal, we pay for the meal, and then we go back and we pay the chef in order to prepare it properly, in order to make sure that there's fresh food on it. There's the baggage regulations. Well, we abide by the baggage regulations, and then we pay off the people at the airport in order to make sure that they abide by them too. Everywhere we go, we have to pay people underneath the table just in order to get things done properly. Because there's an old joke over there, and that is the government pretends to pay us, and we pretend to work. And let's say this. This is not a joke. I mean, this is what they believe. You know, doctors. This is how the system works. They're completely out of medical supplies before the last coup. And what you do is you take your loved one to the hospital. They'd be dying, and the doctor would give you a thing telling you what medicine were needed, and then you had to go out and find it in the black market. Then after you found the medicine in the black market, you brought it back to the hospital and you gave it to the doctor. But you just didn't give it to the doctor. You gave it to the doctor with money. You see, that's so that the doctor would use it on your relative and not sell it to the black market. Because if he did, you'd have to go out and buy it again. This is the way this system actually worked. This is how bad it was. And people just, the medical system, absolutely in complete chaos. I have one hospital in Minsk that we support. They got their last new surgical instruments in 1977. They have been using the same scalpels since 1977. Some of them are ground down so far that they would be better off using razor blades fresh out of the package. They don't know what disposable instruments are. They don't know what disposable sanitary... And people die more often from what they get in the hospital than what they had when they got there. It's absolutely... And then no respect for human life at all because of the atheistic society. I was going through the cancer ward where little children were dying because of the exposure to the radiation at Chernobyl in Minsk. And I took a newspaper team with me from Dallas, and we're going and we get into this one little child perhaps has days to live. And the mother is sitting there beside the child in the hospital room, and the head doctor, who is a woman of that particular unit, was with us, escorting us, and she spoke fluent English, but we had our own translator with us. We walked into this one room, and in front of the child, she says something to her in Russian, and my Russian's fairly good, and I thought I understood it, but I said, I can't believe, no, she didn't say that. And I turned to the translator, and I said, she didn't say that, did she? I said in English, and she said, yes, she did. What she had said was to this woman, have you gotten your funeral check yet? And what it was is she was saying is, have you gone to the state to get the money for the funeral for the child yet? Just total insensitivity
because of the lack of God and of basic morality in the nation. The alcoholism rate in the Soviet Union is pandemic. 1 out of every 5 adults is an alcoholic. 20%. The factories had drying out rooms there, where you would come in, punch in, and after you punch in, then you would go to the drying out room while you're on the clock in order to get sober enough to run your machine. Might take 2, 3, 4 hours, and then you'd report to your machine. Meanwhile, you're on the clock. Women there, the average Soviet woman had 17 abortions in her lifetime. 17. It is the primary means of birth control in the Soviet Union was abortion. Was the primary means. Because pills and all the other things were unavailable. The only way to practice birth control there was through abortion. And most women just didn't want to bring children into the world because it was so bad, because the system was so miserable. And that's why I got involved in it. That's why I'm still involved in it there. We still furnish Bibles to ministries. I own a tour company there which is a service ministry to other ministries. We manage the affairs of other ministries there, furnish them buses, advertising, rent them their halls, furnish their hotels and transportation, and we supply a visa service in the United States for them, and have contracts with the airlines in order to take ministries over there, in order to preach the gospel, to organize Sunday schools, and to do other work in that area over there. And that is principally what we do there. All right, having done that, now that everybody's in a state of shock because I didn't give the standard Road to Damascus experience talk that everybody came here to hear, if you'd like me to answer any questions, I'll go ahead and do that now. Does anybody have anything? We're going to have a question and answer. We are doing the question and answer period now, aren't we? Okay.
What we're going to do is we're going to bring out dessert.
We're going to bring in dessert and coffee. All right.
While that's going on.
Well, bring out my coffee, and we'll have the... I'm not going to ask... it took me 1 full day to find decaffeinated coffee in Sydney. And I finally found a bottle of it. I've got it in my suitcase. If you fellows knew exactly what caffeine did to your prostates over here, there'd be more of it sold. Decaffeinated coffee, but we won't go into that. A question in the... Where's the question? Yes, sir. The question is the last election, the election in the United States, what George Bush was, and who President-elect Clinton is. That's a hard question. I knew President Bush personally. I have met and talked with him many times. He has sent me several personal letters. He was a very godly man. He and his wife, Barbara, have prayed together at their bedside every night that they have been married. He was probably, as a Christian, probably the most devout man that we have had in the White House since Abraham Lincoln. He was not trusted, and he was misunderstood by the Christian community, who for some reason was in love with Ronald Reagan, who they thought was a good, godly man, who was actually an Ayn Randian and a social Darwinist. And Ronald Reagan put men on the Supreme Court that have been made devastating decisions to religion and to the Christian faith because they are not moral conservatives, they are economic conservatives. And the only one that really was put on the Supreme Court that was a moral conservative was put there by Bush. Bush lacked certain leadership qualities, domestic leadership qualities, and he was also surrounded by an administration that had run its course and had become weak. And had he kicked most of those people out of there when he took office, he would have been in better shape. But he kept them around them. They had solidified themselves, and they had become fat and lazy. And also, they had the people in the party had abandoned the religious right completely because of some of the views that were held. As far as Clinton, Clinton is a professional politician. He has never worked a day in his life. And I mean, I say that by that I mean he has never worked where something had to be produced. He has always been, I mean, the first thing he did when he got home from being educated in England was to run for political office. So he's just never held a regular job his entire life. He is a Baptist. Al Gore is a Baptist. He says that he is against abortion, but he thinks that people should have the freedom to decide whether they want abortions or not. He's a member in good standing at his church, although he used the homosexuals and in order to help him get the Democratic nomination. He is a pragmatist that wants more than anything else to be President of the United States, and that has been his goal since he was 16 or 17 years old. Now, I say that because I don't think the man that was elected is the man that we will have as President of the United States. I think that he is probably a lot more conservative but had to maintain certain liberal policies in order to receive the nomination of the Democratic Party. After receiving the nomination, he started to move toward the right, and I think I told Fred 2 or 3 days ago, watch Clinton the day after the election will start to move further to the right, and he has. I mean, almost immediately. His position on free trade has changed. And I think that he will discard the National Organization for Women and the homosexual lobby and the ACLU, because keep in mind that he was only elected with 43% of the vote, and that if he is going to win the election again in 4 years, he has to broaden his constituency, and that means he has to appeal to Middle America. So I don't think any of us really knows who he is yet. I think we're going to find out in the next 6 months. He'll have to show himself as he moves further to the right. Okay. Any other questions? Well, the question is the bleak picture that I pointed about Russia. What about their sports program and their space program? Well, a couple of things. First of all, the sports program, those were all professional athletes. And if Australia and England and France and Germany and America and Canada would have been allowed to have use their professional athletes, the Russians probably wouldn't have won any medals. And I think we saw this year what happened when we were allowed to use one of our professional basketball teams. But these are professionals that worked all year round. Our basketball teams, our sport teams in America, normally met for the first time 30 days before the games, and they were true amateurs. As far as the space program, what resources the country had, they put into the military. The space program was part of the military. It was actually called the Space Forces, not like ours, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It was actually a division, a military division. That's number one. I sort of have referred to people, have said that the Soviet Union was a gigantic Iraq. It was a huge third world country with enormous oil reserves and a big army. So if you just take what Iraq was and multiply it by 20 times. That's really what the Soviet Union was. And you can get, when you're willing to take all your resources and put it into one basket, you know, you can get some pretty good results. But other areas of their military were not that good. You know, they lost 20,000 men a year during training. During training. In the United States, if we would lose 1 or 2 men in training, there'd be just, I mean, the ceiling would come down in the Congress, you know. But they'd lose 20,000 men a year. Also, the total mismanagement without opposition, and as much as, you know, we hate it, sometimes in a democracy, particularly when our party's in power, you know, we don't like the opposition very much. But in Gorky Park in Moscow, there's 7 nuclear dumps. 7 nuclear dumps. This is where the children play. The North Sea may have had 1 million curies of nuclear waste dumped into it in just metal containers. Once those, if it isn't cleaned up, once those containers rot, it could kill every fish in both oceans. The industrial pollution, the Chernobyl was the second nuclear meltdown that they had. The first one was north of Moscow, northeast of Moscow, toward the Urals. Most of their streams, I read the last time I was in Moscow an article that said that if as of that day there were no more industrial pollution in Russia, virtually the entire water supply system of the nation and the air would still be poisonous for another 20 years. They have no scrubbers on any of their chimneys, on any of their factories. Heavy metals are poured out into the rivers and streams with none of the types of protection that we have. And ironically enough, while they were doing this in the Soviet Union, the Communist Party in Australia and New Zealand and the United States and Canada was pointing out at the pollution problems we have here, encouraging, and it was it was an economic war that they finally lost. But there was a Chinese philosopher, what was that man's name? Yeah, that's right. And you know, this was the way all Russian generals were required to read his works, and the Communist Party was basically fighting the war with the West along those lines, to cause your enemy to do whatever is going to cost him money and distract him. But they lost their own war. They lost it as surely if shots would have been fired. The only thing that concerns me, I think that I honestly believe, and I don't know whether this knowledge comes from revelation or whether it's just what I've seen, but we have all, the last few years, I mean, we've just all gloated. And we have pointed toward the collapse of the Soviet Empire as a new beginning, a new world order. I think that in a decade, perhaps within a decade, we are going to look back at the date that the Soviet Empire collapsed, and we are going to say this was the worst thing that ever happened to civilization. Because we have lost control of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nuclear weapons that nobody knows now where they are, what they're doing, or in whose hands or control they're in. The Muslim religion is probably the most dangerous force in the planet today. Almost a third of the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons are in the hands of a Muslim republic. The last time I was there, the empty pods, I saw the pictures of the empty pods of 5 missing nuclear weapons that are believed to be in Iran. Actually, now the Polish intelligence has confirmed that there is a black market in nuclear weapons inside of Poland, and that nuclear weapons and enriched uranium has been moving back and forth out of the Soviet Union. And unfortunately, people think in terms of nuclear weapons of great big rockets and huge heavy things. This isn't true. An American M50 pack is a man carries on his back. It's a knapsack, and it carries it's a 1 kiloton weapon, and it's used for guerrilla warfare behind enemy lines. It's made to strap onto bridges and to disintegrate them. The Soviet Union had hundreds and hundreds of the same type of weapon, thousands of nuclear artillery shells that are only 122 millimeter howitzer shells, that also dozens of those apparently, or even hundreds of those, are missing. There are nuclear weapons are spread all over the place now that nobody knows where they're at or what they're doing or who has them or who has control over them. And there's no telling, what this could come of it. Also, Russia's having some deep troubles. There is the chance that excuse me, my tongue isn't working here tonight, that Kazakhstan has already turned and pointed nuclear weapons back toward Moscow in order to fake them out. There is a good chance that the Ukraine is so afraid of the Soviet Union, of Russia, and the fact that Russia wants the Crimea area back with the big naval bases, that they are refusing to return their nuclear weapons. They're refusing to honor or ratify the SALT agreement. And there is a good chance of a European nuclear war within, if not years, maybe even within months. And I don't know if we're going to look back on this. We're probably going to wish that the monolith was there as a nice enemy, that had, it was a nice, secure feeling. As long as the United States and the Soviet Union had tens of thousands of warheads pointed at each other, the world was safe. And what may look as something that is stabilizing could probably be the most destabilizing thing that has ever happened to the world, and could be leading to absolute world chaos. Is there another question? Yes. Where? Yes, ma'am. That's right. The question is, no Christian organization attempted to stop my mother from removing prayer from public schools in 1963. That is correct. And I compare that, if you might want to read the history of the fall of Constantinople. It's a very interesting. The city was about to celebrate its 1,000th anniversary as a city. And just oddly enough, just a few years before the discovery of America by Columbus. And they were so busy planning the celebration of the 1,000th birthday of their city, or 1,000th anniversary of their city, that they just did not feel that it was necessary to be involved in the defense of the city against the Muslim hordes. And their logic was simple. Constantinople has always been. Constantinople is the maidenhead of Christianity. Constantinople will always be a Christian city. Constantinople will always be. When the Muslims attacked the city, the only defenders on the wall were a few Christian crusaders who had were in the area. The city was overrun. Every man was killed. The women were raped, and the children enslaved. And that was the answer. Everybody in America said, well, this is a Christian nation. We've always had prayer in the schools. We'll always will have prayer in the schools. We don't need to worry about it. Thank you.